Production, cost, and industry structure. So today we'll define some terms. We'll look at what we think of as explicit cost, implicit cost in economics, accounting and economic profit. We'll talk about production in the short run, cost in the short run, production in the long run, cost in the long run. Amazon is an American international electronic commerce company that sells books, among many other things, shipping them directly to the consumer. Until recently, there were no brick and mortar Amazon stores. A major reason for the giant retailer's success is its production model and cost structure, which has enabled Amazon to undercut the competitors' prices even when factoring in the cost of shipping. So, what is a firm? Let's define some terms. A firm or producer or business is an organization that combines inputs of labor, capital, land, raw materials, or finished component materials to produce output. What's private enterprise? Private enterprise is the ownership of businesses by private individuals. What is production? Production is the process of combining inputs to produce outputs, ideally of a value greater than the value of its inputs. So the spectrum of competitions, firms face different competitive situations, and that'll be the major crux of the end of this course. We'll talk about perfect competition where there's many firms are all trying to sell identical products. We'll talk about an example would be the fast food industry. That is a perfectly competitive market. We'll talk about monopoly where there's only one firm is selling the product and this firm faces no competition. Your electric utility in your city, that's a good example of a monopoly. A monopolistic competitive firm is a situation when many firms selling similar but not identical products. Again, you can look at maybe steakhouses. So there's a lot of steakhouses in Texas or in your city, but there's only one Ruth Chris Steakhouse or one Morton's. So it's the same type of restaurant. It's just different price points because of the cut of meat or the quality of service. And then finally, we have oligopoly, which is a situation with few firms that sell identical or similar products. A great example of oligopoly structure would be oil, producers of oil, the oil cartel. That's a good example. I wanted to introduce some terms in economics. We say profit equals total revenue minus total cost. So whatever residual is left over after total cost is what we consider profit. Revenue is income, income a firm generates from selling a product. So price times quantity gives you total revenue. We have what we also call implicit and explicit costs in economics. So out-of-pocket costs, wages, rents, those are explicit costs. Implicit costs are opportunity costs of using resources. The depreciation of goods or materials or equipment, that is what we consider implicit costs. They're the opportunity costs. We talked about what opportunity costs in earlier sections in this course. What you give up to acquire or to get something else. That's inherent and intrinsic in what we consider implicit cost. So we talked about profits. What are accounting profit? Accounting profit equals total revenue minus explicit cost. Whereas in economics, economic profit, we use total costs. It's total revenue minus total cost, but we also include explicit costs, which we just defined, and we also include implicit costs as well in generating economic profit. The production process for this pizza includes inputs such as ingredients, the efforts of the pizza maker, and tools and materials for cooking and service. So all those things go into that pizza, but also is derived. There's explicit cost, all those toppings, that's a cost, but there's also implicit cost, opportunity cost as well. That's in that in that pizza as well. So the categories of factors of production are natural resources, which is land and raw materials, labor, capital, technology, entrepreneurship, and we've created a function. I mean, we in economics we try to compute what we can compute. And so the mathematical production function is Q equals a function of natural resources, labor, capital, technology, and entrepreneurship. So let's just define these terms. Fixed inputs are factors of production that can't be easily increased or decreased in a short period of time. A good example would be the mortgage. The mortgage is kind of fixed over a 30-year period. Variable inputs are factors of production that a firm can easily increase or decrease in the short period of time. So the shorthand function of the production function is QF, Q, the function of labor, and K, fixed inputs and variable inputs. Let's define a short run. Short run is a period of time during which at least some factors of production are fixed. And the long run is a period of time which all factors of production are variable. So when we say short run in economics and long run in economics, we mean variables are either fixed in the short run, costs are fixed in the short run, some factors of production are fixed in the short run, but in the long run, they tend to vary over time. Production in the short run may be explored through the example of lumberjacks using the two-person saw. So if you look at, since K is fixed in the short run, the amount of output trees cut down per day depends on the amount of labor employed, the number of lumberjacks working. A new term that I'll introduce is the marginal product. So the marginal product is the change in total product over the change in labor. There is a law, like there's a law of diminishing marginal utility. The concept applies here as well. There's a law of diminishing marginal productivity. As firms employ more labor, eventually the amount of additional output produced decline. If you think of the counter behind the counter at your local McDonald's, if they've got 5 workers behind the counter, seems to be a pretty efficient operation. But put 25 additional people, so now you've got 30 people behind that same counter. They're all over each other. So although I've increased the labor, the productivity per labor, I'm going to get less because they're bumping into each other and doing all those things. So that's what we mean when we, just a simple version of what we mean by law of diminishing marginal productivity. So in the short run, long run, you can see the top graph shows the short run total product of trees. As the number of lumberjacks increase, the output increases until 5 lumberjacks are reached. And then you can look at the marginal product where it takes a dive because you're getting less from each additional worker that's added. General case of total product curve, general case of the marginal product curve. Total product tends to slope upwards. Marginal product tends to slope upward and then begins to decline because of the concept of the law of diminishing productivity. So cost in the short run, factor payments. What are factor payments? What the firm pays for the use of factors of production, raw materials, rent, wages, interest and dividends, interest if they have a loan, and then profit at the end of the day. Variable cost or cost of variable inputs like labor, fixed cost or cost of fixed inputs. Rent is a fixed cost. Total cost is the sum of variable costs and fixed costs. These are cost formulas that we use in economics. You may be called upon to do some calculations. So remember what the average total cost is. It's the total cost over the quantity. Remember what the marginal cost is, which is the change in total cost over the change in quantity. So average variable cost is variable cost divided by the quantity of output. At zero production, the fixed cost of 160 are still present. As production increases, variable costs are added to fixed costs, and the total cost is the sum of the two. You can look at these cost curves. I want you to pay attention to them because they'll tend to look different as we begin to talk about perfectly competitive firms, oligopoly firms, monopoly firms, monopolistically competitive firms. You'll notice that some of the cost curves look differently because of the industry. If I'm in a competitive industry, my curves will look different. If I'm in a monopoly, they look different. And I'll highlight those as we go forward. But you can see the average total cost and average variable cost tends to slope downward. The marginal cost tends to slope downward and then generally slopes upward. So average profit or profit margin is the price minus average cost. If the market price is greater than average cost, the profit will be positive. If your price is less than your cost, then it will be negative. You're losing money. You can't lose money. You can't have a price that's below your cost. In the long run, all factors, including capital, are variable. Because all factors are variable, the long run production function shows the most efficient way of producing any level of output. The long run is the period of time when all costs are variable. Production technologies, alternative methods of combining inputs to produce output. Economies of scale is the situation where as the quantity of output goes up, the cost per unit goes down. This is just economies of scale. You can see just as I spoke before, you can see where it is downward sloping because cost is reduced as output is increased. The shapes of the long run and short run average cost curves shows the lowest possible average cost of production, allowing all inputs to production to vary. Remember I said that over the long term, all costs vary so that the firm is choosing its production technology. In the short run, the average total cost curve in the short term shows the total cost of the average fixed cost and the average variable cost. What I want to remind you here is when we talk about economies of scale, that's built by each consecutive short run average cost curve. So as this industry moves along the production continuum and get better at producing, each short run average cost curve becomes its long run average cost curve. Two terms I'd like to introduce to you. Constant returns to scale. When expanding all inputs proportionally does not change the average cost of production. So in economies of scale, it does. It lowers it. In diseconomies of scale, the long run average cost of producing each individual unit increases output. You don't want diseconomies of scale. For sure, you want economies of scale. The shape of the long run average cost curve has implications for how many firms will compete in the industry, whether the firms in an industry have many different sizes, or if they will tend to be the same size. Again, looking at the long run average cost curve, low cost firms will produce at an output of R when the long run average cost curve has a clear minimum point, then any firm producing a different quantity will have higher costs. In this case, a firm producing at quantity of 10,000 will produce at a lower average cost than one producing at 5,000 or 20,000. Again, low-cost firms will produce between levels R and S, looking at example B, when the long-run average cost curve has a flat bottom, then firms producing at any quantity along that flat bottom can compete. In this case, any firm producing at between 5,000 to 20,000 can compete effectively. Firms producing less than 5,000 or more than 20 would face higher average costs and unable to compete. And there we have it. That's production. Thank you very much.